The call came in at 6:10 on a Tuesday morning in November, when the frost was still sitting heavy on the backfield, and I hadn't even put the kettle on yet. I recognized my granddaughter's number on the phone. She was 10 years old and had never called me that early in her life. I picked up on the second ring. Grandpa. Her voice was small, careful, the kind of careful that a child uses when they're holding something fragile. Morning, sweetheart. You're up early. Grandpa, don't open the workshop today. A pause. Please, just don't go in there today. I stood there in my kitchen in Timmins, Ontario, the linoleum cold under my wool socks, and I didn't know what to say to that. My workshop was attached to the side of the house, the way it had been for 31 years. I had spent more hours in that room than I had in any other room in my life, including my own bedroom. Sweetheart, why would you say that? Just trust me, Grandpa. Please don't open it. She hung up before I could ask her anything else. I stood with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the birch trees along the back fence were bare, their white trunks pale in the early gray light. My wife Elaine had planted 4 of them the summer we moved in, back in 1993. She passed in 2019. I still talk to those trees sometimes when I thought no one was watching. I looked at the door that connected the kitchen to the workshop, the same door I'd walked through every single morning for decades. I had a cabinet order half finished in there, custom maple doors for a retired schoolteacher in Kapuskasing, who'd been waiting patiently since September. I was 64 years old, still working with my hands, still proud of it. I put the kettle on and sat down at the kitchen table, and did not open the workshop door. I told myself it was because I hadn't had my coffee yet. The truth was that something in my granddaughter's voice had reached through the phone and settled in my chest like a cold stone, and I couldn't shake it loose. Her mother, my daughter, called me around noon. She sounded tired in the way she always sounded tired when something had been weighing on her for days, and she'd finally run out of room to carry it alone. Dad, are you home? I'm home. Don't go anywhere. I need to come over. Me and Warren. Warren was my son-in-law. We got along fine on the surface, the way 2 people can manage fine on the surface when there's enough distance between them. He'd always been polite to me, always helped carry things at Christmas, always said the right words, but there was something in him that I'd never been able to put my finger on, something that went quiet when it should have been open, something that watched rather than participated. My daughter arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Warren was with her. My granddaughter was not. My daughter sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the wood, like she needed the surface to hold her up. She was 41 years old, and she looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Dad, she said, we need to talk about the property. And just like that, the cold stone in my chest got heavier. The property was 32 acres on the edge of town, a woodlot and a cleared field, and the house my grandfather had built in 1947, which my father had inherited and which I had inherited from him. The workshop I'd built myself in 1991, before my daughter was born. The land was mine, fully paid, no mortgage, no complications. Elaine and I had always planned to pass it to our daughter one day. What I did not know, sitting at that kitchen table while the afternoon light came through the window and hit the side of Warren's face, was that Warren had been quietly meeting with a real estate developer out of Sudbury for the better part of 6 months. My daughter had not known either. She found out 4 days before she came to my house. She found a folder on Warren's laptop. She hadn't been snooping. She'd been looking for their household insurance documents. And in that folder were emails, draft agreements, and a document she described to me as a capacity assessment referral. Someone had been corresponding with a social worker about arranging a formal evaluation of my mental fitness to manage my own affairs. That someone was Warren. I sat very still while she told me this. Warren sat beside her with his arms folded and his eyes on the table, and he didn't say a word to contradict her, which told me everything I needed to know about whether it was true. The developer wanted the land for a subdivision. 32 acres on the edge of Timmins was worth considerably more than it had been when my grandfather built his house on it. If I were deemed incapable of managing my own property, if a capacity assessment went the wrong way, if the paperwork got in front of the right people at the right time, there were legal mechanisms that could transfer management of my affairs to someone else, and Warren had apparently been learning a great deal about those mechanisms. He told me it was for your own good. my daughter said, and her voice broke on the last word. He said he was worried about you living alone. He said the land was just sitting there, that you weren't really using the woodlot, that you'd be better off in something smaller in town. She was crying now. She wasn't angry at me. She was angry at herself for not seeing it sooner. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "Tell me about the workshop," I said. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "He was in there last week, while you were at your doctor's appointment. I didn't know he was going to do it. He said he was dropping something off at your house. I thought he meant the porch. I didn't think anything of it." She looked up at me. He had a key. I'd given my daughter a spare key years ago, for emergencies. What was he doing in the workshop? "Going through your files," she said quietly. "Your property documents. The deed. Mom's will." "He photographed things, Dad. I found the photos on his phone." Warren cleared his throat. It was the first sound he had made in 10 minutes. "I was trying to understand the financial situation," he said, in the tone of a man who was prepared a reasonable explanation. "I was trying to look out for the family." I looked at him for a long moment. He met my eyes for about 3 seconds, and then looked away. "Whose family?" I said. He didn't answer. I wanted to explain something about my granddaughter, because she's the part of the story I keep coming back to. She had been at the house the week before, the same week Warren had been in the workshop. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table while I finished up a small repair job on a chair I was restoring, and at some point she came and stood in the workshop doorway and watched me work, the way she'd been doing since she was small enough to sit in the wood shavings without it being a safety issue. She didn't ask me about what she'd seen. She was 10 years old, and she understood, with a particular instinct that children have, that what she had seen was not right. She didn't tell her mother right away. She was frightened of causing trouble between her parents. But when she woke up on that Tuesday morning and thought about it, what she felt was not confusion. What she felt was fear. Fear for me. So she picked up the phone and called me at 6:10 in the morning and told me, in the only language available to her, that something was wrong. "Don't go in the workshop today, Grandpa." She couldn't have known what she was protecting me from. She couldn't have known that Warren had planned to be at my house that Tuesday. I found out later that he'd arranged to come by while I was supposedly at my weekly breakfast with my old work friends, which he'd heard me mention the week before. He had intended to photograph additional documents. He was, apparently, at an early stage of the process. Things had not yet reached the point where legal action could move forward, but he was building toward it, methodically, patiently. She couldn't have known any of that. She only knew that she had seen a man going through her grandfather's private papers in his private space, and that it was wrong, and that she loved me. That was enough. I won't pretend the next several weeks were easy. Nothing about it was easy. My daughter asked Warren to leave the house the night she came to see me. He went without much argument, which surprised her and which I found revealing. A man who is genuinely wronged argues. A man who knows he was caught managing his exit. He tried once, about 3 weeks later, to contact me directly. He called from a number I didn't recognize. He must have known I wouldn't pick up if I saw his name. He wanted to explain that he had only been trying to help, that I had to understand the responsibility he felt for his family's future, that there was no malicious intent. I let him finish. Then I told him that in 31 years of working with my hands, I had learned to recognize the difference between a man who makes an honest mistake and a man who makes a careful plan, and that a careful plan had a different name. I didn't hear from him again after that. The deed to the property is clean. There was no legal action filed, no formal capacity assessment initiated. Warren had been in the preparation stage, not the execution stage. My daughter consulted a lawyer in Timmins, a woman she trusted, and was told that the plans Warren had in motion were not so far advanced that they couldn't be cleanly stopped. The developer in Sudbury had nothing in writing with my name on it. The workshop is still mine. The birch trees are still standing. There is a particular kind of loneliness in discovering that someone who sat at your table and ate your food and shook your hand at Christmas had been looking at you the whole time and seeing a problem to be solved. I have thought about that loneliness a great deal in the months since all of this happened. Not with bitterness exactly, more with a kind of quiet sorrow. The way you feel when something that should have been simple turns out to be complicated, and you can't go back to the time before you knew. My daughter is living with me now. her and my granddaughter both, while she works out what comes next. It is an unusual arrangement for a 64-year-old man who's been living alone for 5 years, but I find I don't mind it. I wake up in the morning, and there is noise in the house, and noise in a house that has been silent for a long time is not a small thing. My granddaughter comes to the workshop after school sometimes. She sits on the stool in the corner and does her homework while I work, the way she's always done, and occasionally she asks me questions about what I'm making, and I tell her. And occasionally she asks me questions about other things entirely, and I try to answer those too. Last week, she asked me why I didn't go to the workshop that morning, in November, when she told me not to. I thought about it for a moment. I was running a hand plane along a piece of walnut at the time, and the wood was giving off that deep, dark smell that walnut has. The kind of smell that takes me straight back to 30 years ago, when everything in my life was still in front of me. "Because you asked me to trust you," I said, and I did. She nodded, like that was the obvious answer, and went back to her homework. I kept planing the walnut, and I thought about all the times in a person's life when the right thing to do is the quiet thing, the patient thing, the thing that looks like nothing from the outside. I thought about my granddaughter lying awake in the early morning dark, working up the nerve to call me. I thought about how much courage it takes to be 10 years old and to say out loud that something is wrong. They assumed that because I was quiet, I must be confused. They assumed that because I was trusting, I must be easy to manage. They looked at my age and saw a problem waiting to happen, a file to be opened, a situation to be resolved. What they didn't see was the workshop, the 31 years of careful, patient, exacting work. The knowledge that a good joint doesn't need to announce itself, it simply holds. What they didn't see was my granddaughter, and that was their mistake. I still think about that Tuesday morning more than I probably should. Not with anger. The anger came and went, and it left cleaner than I expected. What stays with me is something quieter, the image of a 10-year-old girl lying awake before sunrise, turning something over in her mind, deciding that what she'd seen mattered enough to act on. Deciding that I was worth the phone call. That's the part that undoes me, if I'm honest. Warren had counted on the idea that I was past my prime, past noticing, past fighting back. He had looked at a 64-year-old man living alone on 32 acres outside Timmins and seen a situation to be managed, a file to be opened at the right moment with the right paperwork. He wasn't stupid. He was patient, and he was careful, and he understood that the most effective way to take something from a person is to first convince the people around them that you're doing it for their own good. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. It takes practice. It takes a willingness to look at another human being and not fully see them. What he never accounted for was that someone else was watching too. And she saw everything. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on any test or document, the kind that lives in a child who pays attention, who notices the small wrongness in a situation and holds on to it even when she doesn't have the words for it yet. My granddaughter didn't understand real estate law or capacity assessments, or what a developer from Sudbury wanted with inherited land. She understood that a man was going through her grandfather's private things in a room he had no business being in, and that this was wrong, and that she loved me enough to say so out loud. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. I've been a woodworker for most of my adult life. One of the first things you learn when you work with wood seriously is that the quality of a piece lives in what you can't see, the joints hidden inside the frame, the grain running true beneath the surface. A cabinet can look fine and be hollow. A joint can look rough and hold for 100 years. You learn to stop judging by appearance and start reading for what's actually there. I think about that now when I think about Warren, and when I think about my daughter, and when I think about my granddaughter sitting on her stool in the workshop corner doing her homework. Warren made a careful plan. My daughter, when she found out the truth, chose honesty over comfort, and that was not easy. That kind of honesty costs something. And my granddaughter made a phone call at 6:10 in the morning because her conscience was louder than her fear of causing trouble. What happened to Warren happened because of what Warren chose to do. That's not fate or luck or anything mysterious. It's just the plain logic of actions and their consequences. He built something in secret and it collapsed in the light. The things that held, the things that lasted, were built in the open. My daughter's courage, my granddaughter's steadiness. The 31 years of quiet, patient work in that shop. I don't know what the right word is for what my granddaughter showed that morning. Bravery seems too large. Decency is closer. She did the right thing when it would have been easier to say nothing. And she did it without being asked. And she did it without being asked. And she did it for someone other than herself. That's a kind of strength that I think we underestimate in children, because we're so busy protecting them that we forget they are also watching us, learning from us, and sometimes, when it matters most, carrying us. The workshop is still standing. So are the birch trees. That's enough for me.